listening to Runyons Have Layers, the podcast where two siblings explore the many layers of life and mental wellness, where vulnerability meets strength and where every shared story is a step towards self-discovery. Join us as we uncover the richness of our experiences and find empowerment in every layer. Today, we're going to talk about resilience and what exactly that means and how it can improve our lives. But before we get started, I want to talk about what resilience is and what resilience isn't. So most people think that resilience is just bouncing back from a difficult situation, pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, being strong, just powering through. And while that is part of resilience, that's not what resilience actually is. Resilience is having the tools necessary to regulate your emotions and to be able to move forward in those situations so that you are able to bounce back and move forward. And life is like a roller coaster. It goes up and it goes down. And it's resilience is about when you're in those down parts in life, the low parts, that you have the tools to be able to get back up to, the peaks. How do you understand resilience, Brian?
I guess the way that I see it is similar to what you're saying. Is I don't characterize it in the same way, but when something happens in my life or I have some sort of challenge that I'm dealing with, kind of like, how do I use past experiences and insight, and how do I apply that to whatever I'm dealing with? And I'm not really sure exactly. It's really hard for me to define, actually, for myself. But like the way that you described it makes perfect sense, of like picking yourself up by the bootstraps, which I don't exactly like that, because I feel like that's
it's a lot of toxic positivity. Like that's what resilience isn't. That's what people think it is. But you're right. It's like the toxic positivity of just, positive vibes only.
I guess if I was going to sum it up for what I think resilience is grit, and having the grit to keep moving forward, and like the will to continue forward and moving on and not giving up, trying to find a way out, even when you don't really know what that is yet, and just keeping on. That's sort of how I would define it. But when I was first thinking, I was like, I don't even know really where my brain was even going to start with that.
Yeah. I want to read the definition from the American Psychological Association. It says, quote, resilience is the process and outcome of successfully adapting to difficult or challenging life experiences, especially through mental, emotional, and behavioral flexibility and adjustment to external and internal demands, end quote. And I mean, that's accurate in the way that I understand it. Of course, I'm a resilience coach and I've been through, a lot of stuff in my life. So that's why I wanted to talk about it, because I find that some people, there's like a disconnect based on understanding of what people think resilience is. And I think when people talk about it, a lot of times we hear it with kids. Oh, kids are resilient. They bounce back, and that's true, but that's not what resilience is. So I just wanted to kind of open the conversation and see if we could talk about ways that we can recognize those kind of old tapes in our head about what we have heard about resilience, and how we can cultivate resilience in our lives so that when we do hit the hard times and those lows, that we're able to bring ourselves back up.
Thinking about you saying the tapes back in our head, and we've mentioned this before on previous episodes, of getting past that wall of the things that we learned when we were younger, and how that affects us. And I think that also affects our resilience, both the ability and the inability to have resilience. And I think that the obstacle to building resilience and having resilience is like those tapes that are playing back and feeling like we're not good enough at something, or that we've always heard this about ourselves. And so why would we be able to even do this thing, or to be able to move past whatever we're dealing with, because we've always heard that, oh, you can't do that, or you'll never be able to do that, or you don't look good enough, or whatever the thing is. And I think resilience, when I'm trying to work through something, I always try to think of things in more of an objective way. And I try to remove myself a little bit from it and ask myself sometimes, well, how would I frame this if I was someone else? If that wasn't me, if I was someone else, or I was looking at the situation from the outside. So for me, changing my perspective helps me to see it objectively. And also it gives me another way to see a way out. Because I feel like when you're so close to something and you're so zoomed in on what's happening, it's hard to see all the details and all the pathways that you could potentially go out of, using that as a metaphor. So I zoom out a lot and I try to see the situation from just a different point of view. And I'm not sure if that's related, but that's how I try to approach it, because otherwise you can get overwhelmed and you can feel like you just can't do it and you just want to give up and say, fuck it, I don't even know what to do, so I'm not going to do anything.
Yeah, you're right. And that does help, looking at things objectively and looking at it from, both or all sides or both points of view or whatever the situation is, because that has helped me as well. And the only example I can think of right now off the top of my head is if you walk by somebody and they don't say hello to you, is your automatic thought, oh, they must be mad at me, or what's wrong with them? Or do they have a million things on their mind if they're, maybe they're rushing to the bathroom, or, there's more than one way to think about things. And so tying that to resilience when there is, something terrible happens or, something bad happens in our lives, because that is going to happen. Being resilient doesn't mean that those bad things aren't going to happen. Looking at that situation from all sides, like I did that with a layoff. At first I was really upset, and then I thought, oh, this is really a great opportunity for me able to focus on, this other part of my life. And so that helped me to kind of get through it. And I had those emotional ups and downs as one, any normal human being would, but that definitely did help me. And resilience is a skill that can be developed. Yes, we learn in childhood and through our lives and through relationships and tapes in our head and things that we've learned. But the good news is it's something that can be changed. It has to be done intentionally, but it is something that can be developed over time.
What are some things that we can do to build resilience?
Yeah, I would say the very first thing is to have a growth mindset, to believe that it's possible for you to make it through. And we've talked about this in other episodes about different situations, and it can feel very overwhelming. Whatever you're going through can feel hopeless and you can feel helpless. But I think the one main thing is to believe that you're going to get through this and see the other side. Because if you don't believe that can happen, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's not going to happen. You have to believe that.
For anyone who may not know what a growth mindset is, that's kind of like a mindset where you're, like you're saying, kind of manifesting, thinking in a way that is bigger than what your current situation is. Like if you want a new job, you want to make more money, thinking like towards that. Can you help me understand exactly?
I'm going to use the job example. Whenever that situation happened, not only was I, looking at it I was upset, but I was also looking at the opportunities. It was very much a roller coaster for me. I remember one day I was just feeling like everything I was doing, I was hitting a wall, and I didn't shut down, but I was really upset. I started crying, and I let myself just have those emotions. And after those emotions were processed and through, I just had to remind myself, like, this is going to work out. You will have income again. You will, reminding myself those things, because it's very easy to wallow in self-pity. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't allow ourselves to feel the feelings. Absolutely. But that's why I say life is like a roller coaster a lot of times, because when you're in those low places, like a roller coaster, you're down, and then eventually you get back up to the peak again. And so whenever I was in that situation and I was really upset, I just was reminding myself that things are going to work out, and reminding myself how in the past, when I have felt like this, things have worked out. And it wasn't a situation where I was like, oh, just, see this as a blessing in disguise. And it wasn't that at all. I let myself feel all the crappy feelings. And then I had to be intentional about practicing gratitude and looking for, I guess, the hope in the future. And that is something that has to be practiced and has to be developed, because it's not something that comes naturally, and it's not something that's easy.
One thing that is, I think, a part of this also is the sort of nature nurture idea that some people have natural ability to be more resilient or to be a better musician or to be a good communicator. I feel like people have natural abilities to do certain things, and a lot of times people have to work at it and have to learn how to grow and do something better. And I think this is one of those cases where, yeah, some people might have a natural tendency to be more positive or to see the silver lining or the light at the end of the tunnel, however you want to phrase it. And other people don't, and have to work at it more and have to put things into place, into practice. And like we've mentioned, like affirmation cards and things that remind us that the things that we're doing are leading us to somewhere better. And I think this is a perfect example of using those tools and those habits and practices that we're putting into place to help us to be more resilient. It's almost kind of like mindfulness in a way. Like if you practice it every day and you practice being mindful, then it will give you the benefits later on. It's similar to building resilience, is you have to, practice that on a repetitious kind of way so that whenever things happen or you're dealing with something that's difficult in life, that you have the resilience built up to be able to deal with that and to not let yourself wallow in self-pity, like you're saying.
I also wanted to put it into context in a different situation. So I have PTSD, and I had it so bad at one point that I was completely disabled. I was declared disabled for 3 years and couldn't work and in and out of the hospital and suicidal. And that's why I'm so passionate about teaching people the tools to be resilient. And I say that because I recently experienced a very triggering event, and I didn't even realize that it was happening. And I felt like I was almost regressing or having a relapse with PTSD. And because I started having flashbacks and nightmares and not wanting to leave the house and just like all of the things that I was experiencing before. And I was terrified that I was going back to that place. Even that with all the work that I've done and all of the tools that I have, and my therapist told me that my mental health is better now, which I mean, it is, she's right, but my mental health is better now. And that I am showing resilience because of the tools that I learned and because of how I am handling the situation and the trigger that came up. And I knew that. I mean, it was good to feel validated, but I guess my point is that is the reason to have the growth mindset and use the knowledge and get used to doing it on a daily basis and make a habit, because when that bad situation happens, whatever it is for that person, then you have the tools to be able to move through it. And I'm so grateful that I spent all this time educating myself in the last 8 to 10 years, because it's scary to think about what would have happened to me if I would have been back in the hospital or, suicidal. Like, I don't know. I really don't want to think about it because it's scary, but, having those tools, it really did impact my life in such a positive way. And, it sounds dramatic that changed my life, but it really did. Literally, it changed my life. So yeah, the mindset shift, I think, is the first one, and coping mechanisms. I want to talk about coping mechanisms and what people can do. But first, I want to ask you, Brian, is there anything, whenever you're going through a bad situation, what do you turn to help you cope? Do you have specific things that you use, like journaling, affirmations? We've talked about those kinds of things.
I use music a lot. I listen to music that reflects how I'm feeling sometimes, or I listen to music that I really enjoy. Like whenever I was in a happier time and there's certain songs maybe that I remember from that time, I listen to that. I journal a lot. I do things that I enjoy doing. I try to focus on the things that I do enjoy that will make me feel more pleasure, whether that's playing guitar or going outside and getting fresh air. I try to do that as much as possible because I know that really helps. I remove myself from technology more. I feel like when I'm feeling like down about something or I'm having a difficult time, I guess I take in nature more usually whenever I'm feeling a little off. And sometimes I just take a moment to be in a bad mood and let myself just not do anything or sit on the couch all day. When I was going through my divorce, there were definitely days that I just cried and didn't do anything. And I just said, fuck everything. I'm not going to do anything right now. And I just didn't even care like what was going on. In that moment of time, I was working on my camper van. So I feel like there's also moments where I just try to keep myself really busy. I'll like take on extra work. I'll do extra things, extra projects. I'll explore different ideas that I've been wanting to do. And I'll just like kind of like dive into this rabbit hole of things that I want to like improve myself. In a way, I feel like a lot of my self-improvement comes out of the difficult moments that I've had because I feel like I want to read more. I want to learn more because I want to figure out how to get out of the funk that I'm in. And so I find myself going towards resources, books, just similar to what you did. And when you were experiencing that, you sought out different ways to figure out how to get out of that so you could feel better and so you could move on from it. And I feel like I'm the same way. When there's things like that, I'm like looking up how to figure out what is going on.
And I do the same thing with work or keeping myself busy, but I have to be careful because that can be a numbing behavior, something to keep yourself busy so that you don't think about it. And it depends on the day and the situation and the people that you're around and all of that. I understand that, but that's something that I just want to advise people to be careful of, because when you get into that territory, then you're not really moving through the emotions, and that's how you stay stuck. But I just wanted to give a couple of tools and resources. I mean, I have a bunch, but I don't want this to be, 2-hour long podcast episode, but I want to talk a little bit about the different types of tools and coping mechanisms that people can use. I just wanted to list off a few that are free and easy. The first one that I recommend is using an emotions wheel, or people call it a feelings wheel. And it's just, what it sounds like, a wheel of a bunch of different emotions and sometimes body sensations. We'll link one in the show notes so that you can download it for free. Take a look at it and you find the main emotion that you're feeling. So for this example, we're going to use anger, but a lot of times that's not what you're actually feeling. And so you go through the emotion wheel and see what the body sensations and what the feelings are. And then you might realize, oh, I'm not really angry. I feel hurt or I feel betrayed. Those are different feelings than anger. And so therefore the reaction is going to be different if you're feeling angry versus if you're feeling hurt or betrayed. And I say all that because that's really the first part of resilience after a growth mindset, is being able to identify how you're feeling, because then you can work through those emotions to get through the valleys and up through, to the peaks again. Figure out what emotion you're feeling. After that, if you want to vent, you can use journaling. We've talked about that. Or also surrounding yourself with supportive and safe people. And what I mean by safe is the people that are going to listen to you and they're going to validate your emotions, not try to fix your situation, try to give you unsolicited advice, those types of things. And if there are people out there that don't, there are counselors and therapists and coaches, and there's even free. I want to mention this one free resource. It's called 7 Cups of Tea, and it's a mental health coaching service. I don't know if that's accurate if they call themselves coaches, but basically you can download the app for free and sign up and talk to somebody about your problems. And so that's a really good. I volunteered for them for a couple of years, and that's a really good way to talk to someone for free if you don't have that around you.
There's some sort of statistic. I think Brene Brown did. She just recently released a new book a couple years ago called Atlas of the Heart, which I'll link in the show notes, which is an amazing book. And it's related to this emotions wheel and being able to define and identify the emotions that we're feeling. And she did a study as a part of her research. I guess it's really just research, not a study. But she found that most people can only define 3 emotions. And that's being sad, being angry, and being happy. And you're saying sort of how people might be feeling one way, but they're naming it as one thing, but they're actually feeling a different way, because emotions are so complex and they're very nuanced a lot of times. And so I recommend everyone to go read the book, Atlas of the Heart. It was really eye-opening. And she defines something like 68 emotions. And it's pretty incredible to read the definitions and the nuances. And she gives concrete, specific examples of how you can name it and like what it feels like, different situations. And she breaks it down into, I think, 6 sections where it's like how we feel when ... And she fills in the blank for each section. And then she has a list of emotions based on, different events that might happen in life. So that's a really great resource for naming emotions, and on top of the actual emotions wheel and the other resources that Holly mentioned. So now that we understand a little bit about how we can identify the emotions and name them, the next step is to let ourselves actually feel the emotions and to not try to suppress them, but in healthy ways. If we need to cry, if we need to say we're mad about something, if we need to be stressed a little bit, if there's moments in our lives where things happen and we have an emotional response, most of the time there's some sort of emotional response, and letting ourselves be okay with letting that be okay. And I feel like society tells us that, we can't cry or we can't express emotions, and, oh, you're being too much or you're being dramatic or whatever. And I think that we have to change that narrative for ourselves, because that's the only way to actually move past the emotions, is to feel them. So that's really the next step, I think, in coping with a lot of the difficult situations that we find ourselves in, and to actually move forward and get it out of our bodies so that we can deal with the emotional turmoil that comes from that, but just like moving past it so that we can, be more resilient, and so that we can be more happy with what's happening in life.
And a big part of being resilient, it is about how we respond to the situations in our life, but it's also about the effect that stress has on us all the time, but especially in those moments, and how we respond to that stress. A couple of things that I do that help relieve stress is I just got into restorative yoga, and I try to do that a couple of times a week. I haven't moved into really any more advanced yoga yet, because I'm still just getting used to moving on a regular basis. But just even that movement, any kind of movement, exercise, going for a walk or a run, or, if you're into fitness, but even just moving your body in ways that are supportive, stretching. It's, you wouldn't think that would help move emotions through your body and regulate your nervous system, but stretching can. And it's amazing how much more calm I feel. And I mean, I can just speak for myself. If I'm feeling really tense, and really anxious and just kind of like jittery or just like really frustrated, I'm not a person that's just going to go out and run or go like get those emotions out. So I tap on my chest, kind of like when you imagine King Kong, but just with my fingertips on my like sternum collarbone area, and I just tap and tap and tap and tap and tap, and that gets like the energy going. And then a lot of times I'll stretch, or I will do the restorative yoga.
I think that embodied things is really a great way to deal with stress, because we're in our heads about so much stuff, and we can just think about it and then we go down the rabbit hole, or we start replaying tapes about things that have happened, things that people have told us. And doing anything embodied is a really great way to deal with the stress and to get it out of your body and to process some of that, because otherwise we're just stuck in our heads. It can be like what you're saying, going for a walk for 10 minutes, doing yoga, meditation. There's another practice that I've found really helpful called Feldenkrais. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Basically a series of like micro movements that you go through, and how to adjust your body and get like your skeletal structure like fully relaxed and on the ground. And that was super great, and I would recommend that to anyone if anyone's interested in doing Feldenkrais. But anything like embodied like that, stretching, is always, in my experience, helped me to alleviate stress and to change my mental state, so to speak. Because it gets us out of our heads and it gets us doing something that's embodied.
Yeah. And it's so interesting how effective it is. And I mean, I've heard, how good exercise is for you, but it was more about the endorphins and the runner's high, like they called it. It wasn't necessarily about getting out of your head and into your body. And it's just so fascinating how that embodiment really does help, because the mind body connection is so strong. And once you're getting it through to move through your body, it's like, for me, it feels like my brain just cleared, like the calm after the storm.
I think the next step, once you've been working on those things, is to set some realistic goals on how to create habits and practices that can help you build resilience. So what are some ways that we can start to build resilience with like a daily?
I think the most important thing is to set realistic goals, because the goal that you're trying to get to might seem very big and very overwhelming. Like for my personal situation, I needed to get a job or take on more clients. Like that was the end goal. But I had to break it down each day. What am I going to do today that is going to get me to that goal? So how many resumes am I going to submit? Or how many updates am I going to make to my website? Or, at one point I was like, I need to hire someone to help me with my resume. Like all those little goals lead to the bigger goal. And I use that as an example just because there are so many micro goals on the way to where you're going.
Yeah, I think the job one is a good example, but also a couple others that I'm thinking off the top of my head is learning how to play an instrument like guitar, or getting yourself ready for a marathon. And as you were talking, I was thinking about a means to an end. And there's a saying that I try to keep in my mind, that it's not a means to an end, it's an end in itself. Everything that you're doing should be an end in itself, that you are accomplishing this thing because you want to accomplish that. And then that is a stepping stone to the next goal. And it's not just, you're not only doing it only because you want to get to the end, but you're doing it because it serves the greater goal of you getting to where you want to finish. So for example, if you want to run a marathon, which I do not have any interest in doing, but to use this as an example, you want to run a marathon and you want to cross the finish line, and regardless of how long it takes you, you can't go out and just run a marathon willy-nilly first time and not hurt yourself or die.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You have to train yourself every single day, and you might have to start by running a quarter mile, and you start there, and then over the next few weeks or months, or for me, years, you'd have to, really build yourself up to being able to run 26.2 miles. And it takes a lot of commitment and a lot of practice. Another example I was thinking about was playing guitar. And I remember when I think I was 12 years old, learning how to play guitar, and you have to build up your calluses first because your fingers will hurt, putting your fingers on the string. And you have to start by getting those calluses built up, and you have to practice every day, getting your positions right on how you put your fingers. And it's a daily practice, and you have to be committed to that. And eventually I learned how to play guitar, and I could make chords, and I could play songs, and I could do all that stuff. So it's the same thing with what Holly is saying with, finding a job. Is first you have to say, okay, where am I headed, and figure out your end goal initially, but then you have to break it down into those smaller steps of how am I going to get to this goal step by step, and focus on those individual goals. And you won't be so overwhelmed as well, because then it's okay, today I'm going to look for 10 positions that I want to apply to, and maybe that's all you do. And the next day you start to figure out, okay, now I need to get a resume together, and then figure all that out. And then the next day. And so it's a step-by-step process. And you're going to have challenges along the way with all these things that you're working on, but you have to celebrate the small victories that you have. And you have to find those moments where it's like, like I accomplished everything that I set out to do today, and that's a victory. And that's one step closer to accomplishing my goal at large.
I'm glad that you mentioned celebrating the small victories, because that really is so important in moving through the tough times in life, to remember that you got through it before, or to celebrate the small victories moving toward your goal. It really is encouraging and can help keep you on track.
Yeah, something that I recently heard from a friend of mine was that, you know you're growing when your current bad days are better than your previous good days.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you may have actually said this as well in a previous episode in, a different way. But I think that as you are working forward and you're dealing with hard situations as they come up and you're, moving forward on all that stuff, is the more that you practice resilience and the more that you grow and acquire tools into your tool belt, that remember to look and to look back at what you've gone through and what you've overcome, because keeping your perspective and realizing that, I've dealt with all these challenges and I've successfully gotten through them and I've worked through them, and maybe they were really hard, but that has added to your resilience and it's added to your ability to deal with conflict and adversity that we face and getting through that. So remember that the things that we're dealing with are not permanent. Not saying that they're going to be quick, but that they're not all going to last forever. And it's only a matter of time for things to be done and everything comes to an end, so to speak. And everything has its time. What you said earlier about how we respond to the things that we're dealing with is really, I think, the crux of what we're talking about, is that it's not what we're dealing with or how difficult it is, but it's how we take that and how we respond to it and move forward and build from what we're dealing with, because there's always multiple ways to deal with it. And the better that we are able to respond, the easier that it is going to be to move forward from that.
Yeah. And I think one of the most important things is to show yourself some compassion. Be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up in the situation. Think about if a friend of yours was going through the situation you were and how they felt. If they were upset and crying, are you going to say, get up off the floor and, quit crying or whatever? And, maybe some people would, but I guess just treat yourself how you would treat a friend or how you would want to be treated in that situation.
Yeah, the self-talk, and we talk so badly to ourselves, but don't treat other people nearly as bad as we treat ourselves. At least that's speaking from experience.
Yeah.
It's so easy to go there and be like, oh, you're so stupid, or oh, why did I do that? And I think that really plays into our ability to beat ourselves down and not get through the difficult times that we're dealing with. But the more that we're able to change the language that we're using, even with ourselves, and stop ourselves from going down that path of, oh, I can't believe I did that, or why can't I be smarter, or whatever that thing is for all of us, is that we have to change that tape that we're playing in our head and the language that we're saying to ourselves, because as we are changing that, then we're talking more kindly to ourselves. We're being more compassionate with ourselves of we're human, or we can't be perfect, or I'll do it better next time, or whatever that practice is. And it's almost kind of like affirmations in a way.
It is. Yeah.
You're having to pick different things to say, and you're having to reprogram your brain to talk to yourself differently. And that's a really, really hard thing to do, because if you've been doing that for your entire life or years, then you have to work at it, and you have to unlearn things, and you have to relearn new things. And that's hard work.
Say you have a thought like, I'm so stupid, because you might have made a mistake at work, or you might have forgot your kid's game or something like that. So instead of saying, I'm so stupid, stop that thought right then and there and replace it with something else. So instead of saying, I'm so stupid, you can say, everybody makes mistakes. And, you still have to, if you made a mistake that affected someone else, of course, you still have to own it and, figure out a way not to forget. Yeah. Take responsibility and, whatever. But it is true. Everybody makes mistakes, and everybody has probably done something similar to what you are experiencing. So instead of beating yourself up about it, which takes practice and it does take time. It's not something that's just going to happen overnight. And it takes practice to notice your thoughts, because a lot of times we just have those thoughts and we don't even realize that they're there. And so once you notice that you're saying that to yourself, literally, I imagine a stop sign in my brain and I'm like, okay, stop. And then what is the next thing to replace that?
Yeah, something that I think goes into this too is perfectionism, because I think it's easy for people. I'll just speak from my own experience. I think it's easy for me whenever I started practicing this and changing some of my language, feeling like I was giving myself an excuse to not do something or to not go for excellence is, oh, well, I'm human and I can't do that. Or, oh, I made a mistake. Oh, too bad. I think it's easy to use that as a crutch if you're not careful to be like, oh, well, everyone's human, I made a mistake. Oops. Instead of holding yourself accountable and learning from that and improving, I think that that's just something to be careful of. But I think that it stems from perfectionism, because we're constantly wanting to be better and to, be the best and to achieve and to rise. And so whenever we let ourselves be human, because humans aren't perfect, for me, I have this feeling of like, oh, like I really want to like work harder. I want to work like a little bit more and I want to get this perfect. I want to get it right. But when you make a mistake or whatever, and you're changing your language to like, oh, like, why didn't I do that? Because you can do it and you want to, but in that moment you fell short and you had to like, you just couldn't do it, And so instead of saying, oh man, why am I so stupid? Or why couldn't I do that thing? It's like, I made a mistake. I'm human. And now I know what I need to work on. And so framing it in that way, I think, is really important. But definitely, if you have those sorts of thoughts, like all of us do, I think looking at perfectionism and how we relate to that is really going to open your eyes, because I deal with that all the time. I'm a recovering perfectionist, and it's a really hard cycle to break.
Yeah, I am too. I am too.
So in addition to everything that we've talked about, and to wrap everything up, is resilience is all about thriving in the face of adversity and taking everything we've learned and all of the practices that we've talked about and being able to go beyond what you're dealing with and to move forward and past it and essentially through it. And really doing that is being able to embrace change and being adaptable to all of the stuff that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis in our environments, and finding opportunities within the challenges to grow and to be better for it and to not get ourselves down. And by doing that, we're cultivating a growth mindset and becoming more resilient, essentially. Thank you for joining us and peeling back the layers today. If you enjoyed this podcast and you'd like to support it, please share it with others, and please leave a review, like, subscribe, all that jazz. For more information about us, you can visit runionshavelayers.com, where you can find how to get connected with us and find resources mentioned in our episodes. Bye for now.